Imagine waking up to the sound of tanks crushing your city streets. This wasn't a movie. It was the dawn of a conflict that changed modern warfare forever in the Middle East. In the scorching heat of 1990, the world watched as a massive army gathered on a border. What seemed like a local dispute was about to explode into a global crisis. We are talking about the Gulf War, a war of technology, oil, and power. Let's step back in time to understand how Saddam Hussein gambled everything on a single, dangerous invasion.
Iraq had just finished a brutal 8-year war with Iran. The country was drowning in massive debt. Saddam Hussein needed money fast, and he looked south toward his wealthy neighbor, Kuwait.
Kuwait was small but incredibly rich in oil. Saddam accused them of stealing Iraqi oil through slant drilling across the border. It was a serious accusation that escalated tensions rapidly. Diplomatic talks were held, but they were tense and unproductive. Leaders around the world hoped for peace, yet Saddam was secretly moving his elite Republican Guard troops right to the edge. By late July 1990, the intelligence reports were alarming. Thousands of tanks were poised to strike. The world held its breath, wondering if this was just a bluff or real war.
On August 2, 1990, the nightmare began. Iraqi forces stormed across the border. The Kuwaiti military fought bravely, but was overwhelmed by the sheer size of the invading Iraqi army.
Within hours, Kuwait City fell. The royal family fled into exile. Iraq announced that Kuwait was no longer a country, but was now the 19th province of Iraq. The world was shocked. The United Nations Security Council reacted immediately. They condemned the invasion and demanded an immediate withdrawal. Economic sanctions were slapped on Iraq, cutting off their trade with the rest of the world. But Saddam Hussein refused to budge. He believed the West would not intervene. He underestimated the resolve of the international community, led by the United States and President George H.W. Bush. There was a huge fear that Saddam wouldn't stop at Kuwait. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer, was right next door. If he took that, he would control the global economy. This fear launched Operation Desert Shield. The goal was to protect Saudi Arabia. Troops from the U.S. and other nations began pouring into the desert to draw a line in the sand. It wasn't just America. A massive coalition of roughly 35 nations joined together. Countries like Britain, France, Egypt, and Syria sent soldiers. It was a truly global effort against aggression. For months, there was a strange standoff. While politicians argued and negotiated, soldiers dug in under the hot sun. They prepared their equipment for a war that seemed inevitable, but terrifying. Saddam tried to break the coalition. He took foreign hostages and showed them on TV. This tactic backfired completely, making the world hate him even more and strengthening the coalition's resolve. The U.S. military brought in their newest toys. The M1 Abrams tanks and Apache helicopters arrived. This war would be the first major test for this advanced generation of military technology. As 1990 ended, the UN gave Saddam a final deadline, January 15, 1991. Leave Kuwait or face war. The world watched the calendar, hoping for a last-minute diplomatic miracle. January 15th came and went. Saddam remained defiant. He told his people that the mother of all battles was about to begin. The time for talking had officially run out. On January 17th, the silence of the night was shattered. Operation Desert Storm began. It didn't start with tanks, but with a massive, overwhelming air campaign unlike anything seen before. Stealth fighters, the F-117 Nighthawks, slipped past Iraqi radar. They bombed command centers in Baghdad with pinpoint accuracy. The night sky over the city lit up with anti-aircraft fire. CNN broadcast the bombing live to the world. Reporters in Baghdad hid under tables as the bombs fell. It was the first time people watched a war unfold in real time. The coalition Air Force hunted the Iraqi Air Force. Within days, they established total air supremacy. Iraqi planes were either shot down or fled to Iran to avoid destruction. With the skies clear, coalition planes targeted supply lines. They bombed bridges, roads, and bunkers. The Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait were cut off from their commanders and their food supplies. Saddam had a secret weapon, SCUD missiles. He launched them at Israel, hoping to draw them into the war. He thought this would make Arab nations leave the U.S.-led coalition.
The U.S. pleaded with Israel not to retaliate. Instead, they deployed Patriot missile batteries to shoot down the SCUDs. It was a tense political game, but the coalition held together.
For weeks, the air pounding continued. Iraqi troops in the desert were relentlessly bombed. Morale plummeted. Many soldiers were starving and terrified, waiting for the ground attack they knew was coming.
In a final act of spite, Iraqi forces set fire to Kuwaiti oil wells. Hundreds of fires raged, turning the day into night with black smoke. It was an environmental disaster.
They also dumped millions of gallons of crude oil into the Persian Gulf. It killed wildlife and threatened water supplies. The world watched in horror at this scorched earth tactic. By late February, the air campaign had done its job. The Iraqi army was blinded and battered. General Norman Schwarzkopf, the coalition commander, was ready to unleash the ground forces. On February 24th, the ground war began. Coalition forces moved in. Everyone expected a long, bloody fight against the battle-hardened Iraqi army. But what happened was a complete rout. The Marines pushed directly into Kuwait. Meanwhile, a massive armored force performed a left hook maneuver deep in the desert. They flanked the Iraqi army, cutting off their escape route. Iraqi soldiers surrendered in the thousands. They waved white flags at anything, helicopters, tanks, even news crews. They had no will to fight for Saddam's conquest any longer. The technology gap was immense. American tanks could see in the dark with thermal sights. They destroyed Iraqi tanks before the enemy even knew they were there. It was one-sided. In just 100 hours, the ground war was effectively over. The coalition forces liberated Kuwait City. The joy of the Kuwaiti people was overwhelming as they welcomed the troops. But there was a dark side to the retreat. On the highway of death, fleeing Iraqi convoys were bombed relentlessly. The wreckage stretched for miles, a graveyard of twisted metal. President Bush declared a ceasefire on February 28th. The objective was achieved. Kuwait was free. He decided not to push on to Baghdad to remove Saddam Hussein from power. The war was a massive military victory, but it left a complex legacy. Saddam Hussein remained a dictator. He brutally crushed uprisings by Kurds in the north and Shias in the south. The coalition established no-fly zones to protect these populations. U.S. and British planes patrolled the skies over Iraq for another decade, keeping Saddam's air force grounded and powerless. The war also marked the beginning of 24-hour news cycles. It showed the world the power of precision-guided weapons, changing the public perception of how wars are fought. For the soldiers who returned, many faced a new battle, Gulf War syndrome. Unexplained illnesses plagued thousands of veterans, raising questions about chemical exposure and new vaccines.
The environmental cleanup took years. Firefighters from around the world battled the oil well fires. It was a heroic effort to save the region from permanent ecological destruction.
The Gulf War reshaped the Middle East. It stationed permanent U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia, which became a point of contention and fueled future extremism in the region. Looking back, the Gulf War was a turning point. It ended the Cold War era of proxy battles and started an era of direct Western intervention in the Middle East. The conflict proved that international cooperation could stop aggression. However, leaving Saddam in power meant the story wasn't over. It set the stage for the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Today, we remember the Gulf War as a lightning-fast conflict with long-lasting shadows. It reminds us that while battles can be won quickly, true peace is much harder to secure.
Thank you for watching this journey through history. If you enjoyed this documentary, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. See you next time.